There is a moment in almost every successful person's life that feels deeply confusing. At first, everything seems normal. You begin improving yourself. You become more disciplined, more confident, more focused. You start building something meaningful. And for a while, the people around you seem supportive. They encourage you. They praise your progress. They tell you they're happy for you. But then something changes. The energy shifts. The enthusiasm fades. The conversations feel different. The people who once celebrated your growth become strangely quiet. Some become distant. Others become critical. A few begin waiting for you to fail. And the most unsettling part is that many of them don't even realize they're doing it. Most people assume resentment comes from enemies. Carl Jung believed something far more disturbing. He believed that some of the strongest resentment you'll ever encounter comes from people who genuinely care about you, people who love you, people who support you, people who want the best for you, until your success forces them to confront something about themselves. Because success does something most people never understand. It acts like a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous. A mirror doesn't just show us who we are, it shows us who we could have been, the opportunities we ignored, the risks we never took, the potential we abandoned, and for many people, that reflection becomes unbearable. So instead of facing themselves, they begin focusing on you. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your ambition becomes obsession. Your discipline becomes unhealthy. Your growth becomes a threat. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your existence reminds them of something they desperately want to avoid. Carl Jung spent decades studying this hidden side of human nature. What he discovered explains why some people secretly celebrate your failures, why certain relationships change when your life improves, and why the people cheering the loudest are not always the people hoping you win. Tonight, we're going to explore one of Jung's most unsettling ideas. The idea that the people who secretly want you to fail are often fighting a battle that has nothing to do with you. And once you understand it, you'll never look at human behavior the same way again. Most people believe success attracts admiration, and sometimes it does. But admiration is only one of the emotions success creates. The other is far more complicated. It creates comparison. The moment your life begins improving, something invisible happens in the minds of the people around you. They start measuring. Not consciously, not deliberately, automatically. Human beings are comparison machines. We compare our appearance, our income, our relationships, our intelligence, our social status, even our happiness. We rarely evaluate ourselves in isolation. Instead, we evaluate ourselves relative to the people around us. This is why two people can receive exactly the same outcome and feel completely different about it. A man earning $50,000 a year might feel successful until he discovers his friend earns $100,000. A woman might feel beautiful until she enters a room with someone she perceives as more attractive. Nothing about reality changed. Only the comparison changed. And comparison has extraordinary power over human emotion. Carl Jung understood this better than most psychologists. He believed that many of the strongest emotional reactions people experience have very little to do with external reality. Instead, they originate from internal conflict, the conflict between who we are and who we wish we were, the conflict between our potential and our choices, the conflict between our dreams and our actions. This is where success becomes dangerous, because success acts like a mirror. When people look at you, they are not only seeing your achievements, they are seeing their own unfinished ambitions, their abandoned goals, their excuses, their regrets, their unrealized potential. And for some people, that reflection is deeply uncomfortable. Imagine two friends. Both have dreams. Both talk about changing their lives. Both promise themselves that someday they will become more disciplined, more focused, more successful. Years pass. One of them starts taking action. He wakes up earlier, learns new skills, takes risks, makes sacrifices. The other continues waiting for the perfect moment. Then one day, the first friend succeeds. Suddenly, the second friend is forced to confront a painful possibility. Maybe the obstacle was never the economy. Maybe it wasn't bad luck. Maybe it wasn't timing. Maybe it was him. And that realization is difficult to accept. Because accepting responsibility requires humility. It requires self-awareness. It requires confronting truths most people spend their lives avoiding. So instead, many people unconsciously choose a different path. They protect their ego. They change the story. They tell themselves that you got lucky, that you had advantages, that your success isn't what it seems, that you've changed, that you're obsessed, that you're arrogant. Notice what all of these explanations have in common. They allow the person to avoid confronting themselves. And the human mind loves explanations that protect its self-image. This doesn't make people evil. It makes them human. Most people are not consciously hoping for your failure. In fact, if you asked them directly, they would probably deny it, and they would genuinely believe their denial. Because what is happening is deeper than conscious thought. It exists beneath awareness. In a place Jung spent his entire life exploring, a place he called the shadow. The shadow is not simply the dark side of your personality. It is everything about yourself that you refuse to acknowledge. The emotions you reject, the desires you suppress, the impulses you hide, the insecurities you bury, the jealousy you deny, the resentment you pretend doesn't exist. The shadow grows stronger whenever we refuse to look at it. And the less conscious a person becomes of their shadow, the more power it gains over their behavior. This is why some people become strangely uncomfortable when you succeed. Not because your success harmed them, but because your success awakened something sleeping inside them, something unresolved, something they have spent years trying not to see. And what happens next is where Carl Jung's most unsettling idea enters the picture. Because when people cannot face their own shadow, they often do something else. Something almost everyone has experienced without realizing it. They project it. And projection changes everything. Because once a person begins projecting their hidden emotions onto you, they stop seeing who you really are. They begin seeing something else entirely. And that is where resentment quietly begins. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people hear that quote and think Jung was talking about personal growth. He was, but he was also describing something far darker. Because unconscious forces do not only shape the way we see ourselves, they shape the way we see other people. Think about how differently people can describe the exact same person. One person sees confidence, another sees arrogance. One sees independence, another sees selfishness. One sees ambition, another sees greed. One sees strength, another sees a threat. How is that possible? How can the same person generate completely different reactions? Jung's answer was simple. Most people are not seeing reality. They are seeing themselves. When an individual refuses to confront something within their own psyche, the mind looks for a place to put it. And very often, that place is another person. Imagine a man who secretly regrets the risks he never took. For years he convinces himself that he is being practical, responsible, realistic. But then he meets someone who does exactly what he was too afraid to do. Someone who starts the business, moves to a new city, changes their life, pursues the dream. Immediately something inside him becomes uncomfortable. Because your existence creates evidence. Evidence that his excuses may not have been true. Evidence that another path was possible. Evidence that fear, not circumstances, may have been the real obstacle. And suddenly he doesn't see courage anymore. He sees recklessness. He doesn't see ambition anymore. He sees selfishness. He doesn't see determination anymore. He sees obsession. Notice what happened. Nothing about you changed. Only his perception changed. And perception is where projection lives. This is why some of the strongest criticism you will ever receive tells you more about the critic than it does about you. People often accuse others of the very things they cannot accept within themselves. The dishonest become obsessed with dishonesty. The insecure become obsessed with arrogance. The controlling become obsessed with manipulation. The jealous become obsessed with success. Their minds are trying to externalize an internal conflict. The problem is that projection feels real, completely real. The person projecting is not pretending. They genuinely believe what they are seeing, which is why arguing with them rarely works. You are trying to correct an emotional distortion using logic, and emotions are not easily persuaded by facts. This explains one of the most frustrating experiences in life. The experience of being misunderstood. Many intelligent people spend years trying to explain themselves, trying to prove their intentions, trying to correct false assumptions, trying to convince others that they are not who people imagine them to be. Jung would likely say that much of this effort is wasted, because the issue is rarely information. The issue is projection. The other person is not responding to who you are. They are responding to what you represent. And once projection takes hold, evidence becomes surprisingly powerless. The more you explain, the more confused you become. The more you defend yourself, the less understood you feel. Because you are fighting a battle on the wrong level. You are fighting facts. The real battle is taking place inside another person's unconscious mind. And there is something even more unsettling. Projection becomes strongest when your life begins improving, because success amplifies visibility. The more you grow, the more people compare themselves to you. The more people compare themselves to you, the more likely hidden insecurities become activated. And once those insecurities become activated, resentment begins searching for a target. This is why success often changes relationships. Not because success changes you, but because success changes what other people see when they look at you. Suddenly you become a reminder of goals abandoned, promises broken, potential wasted, years lost. And for some people, that reminder becomes unbearable, which leads to one of the most uncomfortable truths Carl Jung ever uncovered. The people who secretly want you to fail are often not motivated by hatred. They are motivated by relief. Because if you fail, the mirror disappears. If you fail, the comparison ends. If you fail, they no longer have to confront the gap between who they are and who they could have become. And this is where hidden resentment transforms into something much more dangerous. Because the moment another person's failure begins making you feel better about yourself, your happiness has become dependent on their suffering. And that is one of the darkest psychological traps a human being can fall into. The question is, how do intelligent people protect themselves from this? How do they continue growing when success itself can trigger resentment? And why do the wisest people in history almost never respond the way most people expect. That is where Jung's deepest lesson begins. Most people spend their lives fighting the wrong battle. When they sense resentment, they try to eliminate it. When they are misunderstood, they try to clarify. When they are judged unfairly, they try to defend themselves. At first, this seems reasonable. After all, if someone has the wrong idea about you, shouldn't you correct them? If someone misjudges your intentions, shouldn't you explain yourself? If someone believes something untrue, shouldn't you set the record straight? For a while, that logic makes sense. Then life teaches a painful lesson. Some people do not misunderstand you because they lack information. They misunderstand you because understanding you would require changing themselves. And that is a very different problem. Carl Jung understood that most people are far more committed to protecting their identity than they are to discovering the truth. The human ego is a remarkable thing. It can tolerate discomfort. It can tolerate contradiction. It can even tolerate suffering. But what it struggles to tolerate is a threat to the story it tells itself, because every person carries a private narrative, a story about who they are, why they are where they are, why certain things happened, why certain dreams never came true, why certain risks were never taken. And whenever reality threatens that story, the mind begins defending itself. Not with logic, with perception. Imagine a man who has spent 10 years telling himself that success is mostly luck. Then someone he knows succeeds through discipline. Immediately his story is threatened. If that person succeeded through effort, then maybe luck wasn't the real reason. Maybe the obstacle wasn't the economy. Maybe it wasn't timing. Maybe it wasn't other people. Maybe it was his own choices. That realization is painful. So instead of changing the story, many people change their perception of the successful person. Suddenly that person becomes arrogant, obsessed, selfish. Anything that allows the old story to survive. This is why explanation often fails. You are trying to provide facts. The other person is protecting an identity, and identity almost always wins. The truly intelligent person eventually realizes this. Not because they become cynical, because they become realistic. They stop trying to control how everyone sees them. They stop exhausting themselves, chasing understanding. They stop performing for audiences that have already decided what role they want them to play. And something strange happens. The less they explain themselves, the stronger they become. At first, this sounds backwards. Most people believe power comes from communication. But Jung would argue that power often comes from self-possession, from no longer needing constant validation, from no longer requiring everyone to agree with you before you can trust yourself. Think about the strongest people you have ever met, not the loudest, not the most popular, the strongest. Notice something. They rarely spend their lives defending themselves. They rarely rush to justify every decision. They rarely chase approval. They understand something most people learn far too late. People see what they are prepared to see, nothing more, nothing less. And no amount of explanation can force awareness onto someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. This realization changes everything, because the moment you stop trying to manage other people's perceptions, you recover enormous amounts of energy. Energy that was previously wasted on arguments, on proving, on defending, on convincing, on seeking validation. Suddenly, that energy becomes available for growth, for mastery, for building a life that no longer depends on constant approval. And this is precisely why some people become even more uncomfortable when you stop explaining yourself. Because explanation is a form of negotiation. When you explain yourself endlessly, you are unconsciously asking for permission. Permission to be who you are. Permission to pursue your goals. Permission to live according to your values. Permission to grow. The moment you stop asking, people notice. The moment you trust your own judgment, something shifts. The moment you become internally anchored, external opinions lose their power. And that can be deeply unsettling to people whose sense of identity depends on influencing others, because control requires access. It requires emotional access, psychological access, the ability to shape how you feel about yourself, the ability to trigger reactions, the ability to pull you into endless cycles of self-doubt. But once a person develops genuine self-respect, that access begins disappearing. Not because they become cold, not because they become arrogant, because they become clear, and clarity is dangerous. A confused person is easy to manipulate. A clear person is not. A person desperate for approval can be controlled. A person who no longer needs approval becomes difficult to influence. This is why Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, was one of the most difficult journeys a human being could undertake, because individuation requires separation. Separation from expectations, separation from projections, separation from identities imposed by other people, and most importantly, separation from the need to be understood by everyone. The deeper you move into that process, the more you realize something liberating. Not everyone needs to understand you. Not everyone needs to approve of you. Not everyone needs to like you. In fact, some people never will. And that is perfectly fine. Because the goal of life is not universal approval. The goal is truth. The goal is becoming who you actually are rather than who other people need you to be. And once you understand that, a profound freedom begins emerging. A freedom that most people spend their entire lives searching for without ever finding. But there is still one final lesson. The deepest lesson of all, because understanding resentment is only half the story. The real transformation happens when you understand what to do with that knowledge. And that is where Jung's most powerful insight finally reveals itself. Carl Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. At first, that sounds inspiring, almost simple. But Jung knew something most people don't. Becoming who you truly are requires losing who you pretended to be. And that process is rarely comfortable. Because for most of your life, your identity has been shaped by other people, parents, teachers, friends, society. You learned what was acceptable, what was admired, what was rewarded. You learned which parts of yourself should be displayed and which parts should remain hidden. And without realizing it, you began constructing a version of yourself designed for approval, a version designed to fit, to belong, to be accepted. The problem is that a life built around approval eventually becomes a prison. Because the more dependent you become on external validation, the more vulnerable you become to external rejection. Your confidence rises and falls with other people's opinions. Your self-worth rises and falls with other people's reactions. Your peace rises and falls with other people's approval. And that is not freedom. That is dependence. The tragedy is that many people never realize this. They spend decades trying to win a game that cannot be won. Trying to make everyone understand them. Trying to make everyone like them. Trying to make everyone approve of them. But the finish line never arrives. Because every time one person understands you, another misunderstands you. Every time one person supports you, another criticizes you. Every time one person admires you, another resents you. The game never ends. And that is why truly intelligent people eventually stop playing it. Not because they stop caring about people, because they stop depending on people. There is a difference, a profound difference. One comes from bitterness. The other comes from freedom. Bitterness says, I don't care what anyone thinks. A freedom says, people are free to think whatever they want. One is defensive. The other is peaceful. One is a reaction. The other is an acceptance of reality. Jung understood that the moment you stop demanding understanding from everyone around you, something remarkable happens. You begin understanding yourself. For the first time, your attention turns inward instead of outward. You stop asking, how do they see me? And you start asking, who am I when nobody is watching? That question changes everything. Because the strongest person in the room is rarely the most admired, rarely the loudest, rarely the most popular. The strongest person is the one who remains stable whether they receive praise or criticism, approval or rejection, recognition or invisibility, because their identity is no longer being rented from other people. It belongs to them. And once that happens, something strange occurs. The resentment of others loses its power, not because it disappears, because it no longer controls your behavior. You stop shrinking to make insecure people comfortable. You stop apologizing for your growth. You stop feeling guilty for your ambition. You stop explaining dreams to people committed to misunderstanding them. You stop defending choices to people who have already chosen their judgment. And for the first time, you begin moving through life with a quiet kind of confidence. Not arrogance, not superiority, certainty. The certainty that your path does not require universal approval. The certainty that misunderstanding is part of being human. The certainty that some people will dislike you no matter what you do. And the certainty that their reaction is not your responsibility. This is the hidden lesson behind everything Jung taught. The people who secretly want you to fail are not your greatest obstacle. Neither are the critics. Neither are the doubters. Neither are the people projecting their fears onto you. The greatest obstacle is the part of you that still needs their approval. The part of you that still hands over power every time someone misunderstands you. The part of you that still seeks permission to become who you already know you should be. Because the moment that part dies, a new version of you begins to emerge. A calmer version, a stronger version, a version that understands human nature without becoming cynical. A version that recognizes projection without becoming paranoid. A version that sees resentment without becoming resentful. A version that no longer needs to convince the world of anything. And that is the moment real power begins. Not power over others. Power over yourself. The kind of power that cannot be taken away by criticism, cannot be shaken by rejection, cannot be destroyed by misunderstanding, because it was never built on other people in the first place. It was built within. So the next time you notice someone becoming uncomfortable with your growth, the next time your success seems to create distance, the next time you feel the subtle resistance of hidden resentment, remember this: you are not responsible for the battles taking place inside another person's mind. You are only responsible for your own. And the moment you understand that, you become free. If you've made it this far, comment below, I choose growth. Because growth is ultimately what this entire journey is about. Not proving yourself. Not impressing others. Not winning approval. Growth. The courage to become who you truly are, even when it makes other people uncomfortable. And if you want to continue exploring Carl Jung, human nature, shadow psychology, identity transformation, and the hidden forces that shape behavior subscribe to silent power, because the people who understand human nature gain something far more valuable than influence over others. They gain mastery over themselves. And there is no greater power than that.